Thank you, Last Corla, and I move the motion. Minister, as you know, last year more than 16,000 eviction notices were issued by landlords to tenants in the private rental sector, and more than half of those eviction notices were on grounds of sale. Sale of property is the single largest driver of homelessness for families, for couples, for singles, and indeed for pensioners. And as a consequence of that, in the last year alone, the number of people in emergency accommodation funded by your department has increased by a significant 13%. We have never had as many adults and children, single people, couples, families and pensioners in emergency accommodation since these records began. In April 2023, under pressure from the opposition and frontline homeless service providers, the Tenant-in-Situ scheme was properly reopened, and local authorities in particular were given the flexibility they needed to ensure they would buy homes to prevent families and singles becoming homelessness. And while we don't have the final figures for last year, Minister, somewhere in the region of 2,500 households have been prevented from the trauma of homelessness because of that scheme. Minister, this scheme is working. It is working really, really well, and the parliamentary questions that you signed off on today with respect to this scheme from deputies from all parties, government and opposition, show you that. But unfortunately, the scheme has always had its opponents, both in government and indeed in the civil service. There are some people who think that the state should not be using any of its capital funding for acquisitions. I've heard people suggest that somehow local authorities are taking the easy option buying these homes when other options are available for people at risk from homelessness. And while there is no evidence to support any of that, there are two very significant problems right now, and you know what both of these are, Minister. Failure of government last year to set the capital ceilings and targets for this year means the scheme is paused, and there are hundreds of applications pending a decision across the state. But more worryingly, the memo that was sent by your department to local authorities a number of weeks ago is setting out a series of new and significant restrictions to this scheme. And if adequate funding is not provided alongside new restrictions, then people, real people, families, children, pensioners, who would have otherwise got access to this scheme if the rules remained the same, will be denied access to it this year and are at greater risk of homelessness. Now, Minister, I appreciate you're new in the job. I appreciate you have a huge learning curve to meet and that you're listening to many different views on this. But I'm really urging you not just to listen to your officials, but talk to the frontline homeless service providers in our local authorities and read carefully the letters I understand you have been sent by some of our leading homeless charities, because they are telling you, if you do not provide the same level of funding at a minimum this year as last, specifically for Tenant-in-Situ, then local authorities will run out of funding before the year's end. And if you allow the specific restrictions that we've listed in our private members' motion to make its way into the circular which you will sign, less homes will be bought and more people will be at risk of homelessness. Minister, this is really one of the first big decisions you're going to have to make as Minister, and I think it's going to say a lot about the trajectory of travel of your tenure over the time ahead. There are occasions where we will have political rows across the chamber, but this is actually one where we're telling you a decision of government 2 years ago was the right one, the scheme is working, and we're urging you, as our frontline homeless service providers in our local authorities and our homeless charities, not to make the wrong decision. Now, here's the thing, Minister. If you make the wrong decision, and if people who would have otherwise been prevented from going into homelessness otherwise end up in emergency accommodation because of your decision, then that is on you. Everything else we talk about at this point is the responsibility of your predecessors. You and you alone ultimately will make the decision. And I'm really urging you, despite the fact that the wording of your counter-motion is deeply disappointed, take some time to reflect before you sign off on that circular. Listen to the people at the front line who we trust to tackle the issue of homelessness. Listen to your own backbenchers who know this scheme is working. And ensure, hopefully as a matter of urgency, when you make the final decision on capital allocations and when you sign off on that final circular, our local authorities will have the money and the flexibility to ensure that no household, family, single or couple without children will be forced into homelessness because of a bad decision of you and your colleagues. You can do the right thing here, Minister, but it's not what's in your counter motion, and I'd urge you to reconsider.
Deputy McGuinness.
Minister, currently in Waterford, 17 applications under the Tenant-in-Situ scheme have been suspended, and that's 17 families grappling with huge uncertainty and anxiety, not knowing if they will have a roof over their heads this year. And that situation and that sorry story is replicated all across the state in the hundreds. The moves by government to reduce funding and restrict the Tenant-in-Situ scheme will lead to children, women and men becoming homeless right across the state. Over 15,280 people are availing of state-provided emergency accommodation at the moment, 13% increase on last year. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, as you know, when it comes to the real homeless figures. The government seems to be hell-bent on sending still more of our people into homelessness by restricting this scheme. Every week in Dungarvan and in my clinics around County Waterford, I meet families and individuals that have been served with a notice to quit. And the only solace they have, indeed the only thing between them and homelessness, has been the Tenant-in-Situ scheme. When Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil shamelessly lifted the no-fault eviction ban in 2023, the story spun was that the Tenant-in-Situ scheme would ensure no one became homeless as a result. And while the scheme on its own could never hope to mitigate against the abject failure of the government's housing policy, remember homelessness increased by 15% in 2023, it did offer protection to many vulnerable families facing evictions through no fault of their own. We know the scheme can work when it's allowed to. Arguably, it's one of the few schemes instituted by the government that has actually worked. Yet it has been paused for months and will be restricted and potentially wound down altogether. Minister, will you change course from this disastrous approach, fully fund the Tenant-in-Situ scheme for 2025 and give local authorities the resources and the maximum flexibility to operate it?
Our homeless accommodation in Galway City and Galway County is completely and utterly full. That means that there are 2 councils at least that cannot provide accommodation in case of an emergency. At the same time, Minister, if you're looking to get a HAP property in Galway City or Galway County, it is near on impossible to find one. So if you get an eviction notice in Galway City or Galway County, what is the option available to you? You can hope that you can get Tenant-in-Situ scheme, and that is something that has worked in Galway City and has worked in Galway County. But now there are huge amounts of people in limbo. And Minister, I actually was contacted by a woman tonight who wrote to me about her specific case, and I want to read it out to you because it'll just show the pressure that she is under. Maria Cara, I am contacting you directly as I am under huge pressure to ascertain where the application under the Tenant-in-Situ scheme stands for the purchase of the property I'm renting. My landlord has made an application to sell the property under the Tenant-in-Situ scheme for some time and is being frustrated at the lack of progress and has decided to put the house up for sale on the open market. My notice of termination expired in early January, and I am fearful that the house will be sold in the very near future. I understand that there was an issue with the Council receiving its budget allocation for 2025, but I hope that this has been resolved at this stage. If the house is not purchased under this scheme, it will be an incredible pity, as the house would be a very good investment, especially in such a rural area. On a personal level, this is absolutely devastating for myself and my young son as we are facing homelessness. Minister, there is nowhere for people to go in Galway City. There is nowhere for people to go in Galway County because there is not the emergency accommodation. There is not the rental properties. In this very rural area, part of Connemara, there is literally nowhere to go. There are concerns in relation to the memo that was sent out in terms of the amount of funding that would be there and also the particular restrictions. I just really urge you to consider all of this, consider what this woman is saying when you make your decision.
Minister, I don't expect this government to tell the truth in relation to anything related to housing, given the Taoiseach's repeated refusal to confirm or deny that Minister Jack Chambers deliberately misled the Irish people during the general election. But here are some truths. Since April 2023, 2,500 households have been prevented from becoming homeless because of the scheme. 16,546 notices of termination were issued to private residential tenants last year. More than half of those on the grounds of landlords intending to sell the property. The number of people in the Department of Housing funded emergency homeless accommodation increased by 13% in the last year to 15,286, including over 4,500 children. And I was shocked late last year when I started to get emails and messages from people in relation to the length of time it was taken, or the fact that the local authorities weren't approving any new tenant-in-situ applications. This left people absolutely puzzled, and I got onto the Housing Department in Fingal, and they confirmed, yes, we can't proceed with any more because the government haven't given us the figures, and it left hundreds of people, families and individuals, without a decision due to a lack of funding. This is a result of the government's failure to give the targets and its funding that is putting greater numbers of people at risk of homelessness, and landlords are getting frustrated. People who want to sell their homes to the local authority, they want to sell them, and they are disengaging from the scheme. So let's make it simple. You need to ensure that local authorities have the maximum level of funding and targets to be able to operate the social housing tenant-in-situ scheme. You need to provide the local authorities with flexibility to operate the scheme and reject the new restrictions that are being proposed by the Department of Housing.
Minister, I wish you well in your new role. The tenant-in-situ scheme has been hugely successful in preventing hundreds of families in Cork from becoming homeless. This scheme has allowed Cork County Council to buy up properties for tenants who face a no-fault eviction notice, allowing the family to remain in the property as council tenants. This scheme is working, and it should be expanded to ensure the maximum number of tenants at risk of eviction and homelessness can avail of it. But instead of increasing this vital protection for renters with eviction notices, the Minister for Housing has reduced funding and cut targets for this scheme. He has also imposed a series of new restrictions on the operation of the scheme. For example, under the new rules, single people and couples without children will be excluded. This in itself is deeply, deeply concerning. This new rule not only disregards the realities many face in our society, but also maintains unfairness in a system that should be about providing housing stability for all who need it, regardless of their circumstances. Single people and couples without children are just as vulnerable to housing instability as families with children. Now, with the exclusion of these groups, the Minister for Housing is telling many people that they are less deserving of having a stable home simply because they do not fit the certain family model. This is not only an unfair distinction, but a deeply discriminating one. In the short time I have, it has been covered on Red FM and all local papers the last number of days. Jonathan is 33, lives in a caravan in Cove. Stayed in his sister's place, had to move to a car park. Council are pushing him on again. He works 2 jobs. He can't get on the housing list because he doesn't have an address. He was told to use his sister's address. That means her rent goes up. So the system here is very, very unfair. I want to put that on the record because I think there's many, many other people like this. But I will finish with saying that housing should be a right, not a privilege. Determined by the size of your family, the restrictions of a tenant-in-situ scheme need to be reversed to ensure that everyone, single or couple, parent or not, has access to a secure, stable home.
Minister, for the last decade, with the exception of COVID measures, the number of people accessing emergency accommodation has been rising. Today, there are 46 properties to rent in the entirety of my constituency, which is 2 counties, County Longford and County Westmeath. A very basic 2-bedroom property is now well over €1,000 a month, and an actual shed is €270 per week. Your own department's homeless reports show that from January 24 to January 25 in Westmeath, there has been a 17% increase in adults accessing emergency accommodation. In Longford, the figure has remained static. Cold comfort to the couple yesterday who were refused B&B vouchers for themselves and their 4-month-old baby, with literally no idea where they were to spend the night. The emerging trend, Minister, of parents with young children seeking emergency accommodation being threatened with referrals to Tusla is nothing more than repugnant. These parents are incredibly aware of the difficult position they are in. They are literally living it. Yet the tenant-in-situ scheme, which has prevented some 2,500 households from becoming homeless, has been in turmoil, and there are hundreds of applications left in limbo. Any effort to restrict this scheme will put greater numbers of people at risk of homelessness and disincentivise landlords to engage. Sinn Féin fully supports the tenant-in-situ scheme. Our alternative housing plan proposed funding 2,000 acquisitions in 2025 and 6,500 in total over 5 years. We want the scheme to continue. We want the scheme to continue at the current rules, with no new restrictions, the same levels of funding, because you have an obligation, Minister, in your new role to protect those vulnerable families that are so desperately in need of long-term, secure homes.
Minister, the housing and homeless crisis has been getting worse under successive Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael governments. So this decision to further restrict the Tenant-in-Situ scheme, a scheme which has prevented so many people from becoming homeless, is absolutely bizarre. On top of these new restrictions, we also have delays on applications going back months because your government couldn't get its act together and agree new funding levels and targets for 2025. And what these delays mean, and I'm going to give you an example. A mother in my own constituency with 2 children who has been living in a home for 10 years has been waiting since last August to find out if they are going to have to leave their home. The home that their children has only known. Now, this woman's landlord was happy to go down the tenant-in-situ route, but because of the delays in funding for her application with Fingal Council, it's been put on pause now for 6 months, leaving this family in limbo. Minister, this isn't good enough. And now you're restricting who can apply. Single people and couples without children won't be able to avail of it. And it also appears that these changes will mean that local authorities will not be able to refurbish homes that they buy under this scheme. To me, Minister, this reads like an attempt to do away with the scheme itself by making it totally unworkable. But Minister, this scheme has proven to work. In the last 2 years, it has prevented 2,500 households from becoming homeless. Now, we in Sinn Féin have put forward a proposal of funding of the scheme that would allow for 6,500 homes to be purchased in a 5-year term. We want to continue to work under the current rules, and we want to make sure that local authorities have the staff to process the applications. Last Count Carla, I would ask all TDs in this House to vote for this motion. This motion also calls to give local authorities the funding and the flexibility to help this scheme. This scheme, Minister, will prevent other families going into homelessness. Please, please support this motion.
Thank you, Deputy Quinlivan.
Minister, the announcement made by yourself on the Tenant-in-Situ scheme will make more people in Limerick homeless. That's a fact. That's what you're doing. The changes announced by yourself are a mistake and they should be brought back as a matter of urgency. The scheme as this stood was working. It stopped thousands from becoming homeless. It should have been expanded. It should have been further funded. It is one of the simplest ways to deliver homes for working people. Instead, the Minister has reduced funding and cut the scheme's targets. The restrictive and punitive new rules exclude those who have no children and also exclude single people. Perhaps most ridiculously, councils that have no money for refurbishing their properties cannot now reclaim refurbishment costs from your department. The limited funding combined with additional restrictions makes increasing homelessness, as I said, in Limerick inevitable. Limerick Council held a webinar with councillors last week about the impact of these changes and regarding the current state of play of the housing support in Limerick, and the situation, as you can imagine, is very, very bleak. Across Limerick, there are 107 acquisitions on hold from last year, and with a capital funding allocation for second-hand acquisitions at around €6 million, we understand it is estimated only 20 to 22 of these will proceed with. What that means is there is no capacity to purchase any future properties where notice to quit orders have been issued. What that means is there are 85 households we know of whose inhabitants will become homeless. This excludes any notice to quits from this year. On top of this, there is no refurbishment costs assigned to acquisitions of any properties purchased in a condition short of turnkey ready cannot be prepared for those in need of housing. When the government was formed, there was a lot of rhetoric about getting to grips with the housing crisis, and it looks like you're falling at the very, very first hurdle. After 5 years of failing to meet targets of ever-increasing homelessness of a general election where the actual targets were hidden and public deceived, one might have hoped a new minister might start with a new approach, an approach that keeps people out of homelessness. At last, this is a case where here we go again. Here we go again with more homelessness. Here we go again with sky-high rents and house costs rising. Here we go again with restrictions imposed on those most desperate for housing. and those who cannot afford to purchase their own home. I think the Minister would be best served to take note of the opposition on these charges. He should increase the capital allocation for 2025, not reduce it compared to 2024, allow refurbishment costs in the arbitrary 2-year housing support rule, stop excluding single people and couples without children from the scheme. The Minister says he is committed to ending homelessness, yet takes actions that will only serve to increase this already high numbers of people who are without a home.
Minister, I would say go back and read the Act, I say, because I don't think you have any understanding of what you're looking to do and what we're looking to do. What we're looking to do is protect one of the few things that Minister O'Brien did when he was in office, when he actually listened to the opposition, all the opposition, when we put forward the Tenant-in-Situ scheme as a way of preventing homelessness. And just to give you an idea, and as a Cork man now, you should understand this, there were 1,874 families and individuals given notices to quit in 2024. Cork City Council purchased 79 homes under the Tenant-in-Situ scheme, and that prevented 79 families going into becoming homeless and going into emergency accommodation. And something else you might understand as a Cork man. Right now, a couple can get €877.50 on HAP. Do you know how many places are on daft.ie today where you can rent a property in Cork for that amount of money? Do you know how many? None. None is the answer to that question. And you're coming in here talking about making changes to the one thing, one of the few things that she actually got to work. Do you realise the cruelty that you're bringing to people now? You're going to drive families and drive people into homelessness and into emergency accommodation. Look, Cork City Council actually overachieved. There's Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael TDs come in here criticising local authorities. We have a local authority who's doing it right, who's actually beating the targets, getting more people in. And what are you going to do? You're going to cap them and you're going to limit them. And just this decision to roll back on this, it's a disgrace. And I'd say to Minister Brown, your first job in will be to increase homelessness. You brought in a scheme a number of years ago, banning evictions, right? And the question I have to ask about the banning evictions and about getting rid of the Tenant-in-Situ scheme, who got to the ministers, who got to the government?
Deputy Kenny.
First of all, Minister, to wish you well in your post and to commend my colleagues for bringing forward this motion. The Tenant-in-Situ scheme is, as many have said here, worked very, very well for an awful lot of people out there who are under serious pressure. However, since probably, I suppose, last summer, we've seen a decline and a grind to a halt. And I have many, many people in my constituency. I have a young woman with 4 children. She's a nurse, but because her children are small, she can't go to work. Her husband works locally in the fire brigade in her local town. They are in a rented house. They have a notice to quit. It's valid. They're going to have to leave that house. They can find nowhere else to go. And the Tenant-in-Situ scheme is the only option they've got. And up until now, they have been told that it is not open, that there is nothing there for them. And you're saying, and I respect, you're talking about that you're going to have the circular coming out. The question is, why has that circular taken so long to come? Where has it been up to now? Where is the sense of urgency in delivering for people? Why are local authorities not clear? You're saying you're going to bring clarity. What has taken so long about this clarity? Why? Why delay? Why can't we have it now? Why can't people know where they stand? Why can't the local authorities know how much money they're going to have so that they can go out there and purchase the houses to take people out of their misery? Because it is hugely stressful. And I have dozens of people across my constituency, and I'm in a rural area which doesn't have the same housing pressures as a lot of our urban areas have. But I have dozens and dozens of people in this situation where they have notice to quit, where the local authority is prepared to buy the house, but they do not have clarity from you, Minister, to try and deliver this. So what we need to do now is you need to support the motion we've got, and I take it you've put an amendment to it, which usually means the government in some backhanded way is going to oppose it and going to go off and do their own thing anyway. And what you've done up to now has been a failure. And don't continue with that failure. You're a new minister in a new position. Start where you mean to go on. Show that you are about something different, that you're going to actually deliver for the people out there who need delivery, because too many people are in too much stress and this government is letting them down.
Thank you. Caherlock. The number of adults accessing emergency accommodation across the north east region of Louth, Cavan and Monaghan during a single week in January of this year was 263. a nearly one-third increase on the same period as last year, and the number of children was 130, near a 70% increase on the year-on-year. So what can you do? The Tenant-in-Situ scheme is one mechanism that provides a vital protections to ordinary renters from facing into the cruel, unyielding reality of a local rental market that simply does not have the stock to adequately meet demand, let alone do so at a reasonable price. By facilitating local authorities purchasing homes, not only does it provide a security of tenure for that renter, while also increasing the rental stock in general, but it also prevents that person from joining the growing list of those accessing already overstretched emergency accommodation services. The proof of this scheme is that it has prevented more than 2,500 people from entering homelessness since April 2023. The new Minister, you will face a significant test in the coming days. Will you adequately fund this scheme for the 2025 without reducing undue restrictions? Or will you underutilise or even allow this crucial renters' protection against homelessness to effectively wither away? I would like to commend my party colleague and Sinn Féin spokesperson on housing, Deputy Owen O'Brien, for bringing forward this motion tonight and mandating the government to ensure that local councils have the maximum funding available to operate this scheme, and to reject undue restrictions which will serve only to exclude those who could benefit from this vital support. In particular, as the housing crisis worsens year on year due to failed government policy, I would appeal to every deputy in this chamber to absolutely reject proposals that would see the deprioritisation of single people and couples without children from accessing this scheme. I would therefore again appeal to every deputy, and I appeal to you, Minister, to endorse this policy or this motion. Thank you.
Dr. Crowe.
Good, Margaret. It doesn't make any sense, but the government seems to take every opportunity it can to make the housing crisis even worse. Like we've heard here tonight, you know, the amount of people that, that saved 2,500 households from being made homeless. Families with children, couples, single people, including pensioners, have been presented from long stays in emergency as councils were able to buy their private homes. So we know the scheme works. So the question is, why, Minister, why have you not signed off on the scheme? And why are councils waiting for an answer from your department? I was dealing with a case today, and a family are going to be told tomorrow that the landlord is gone out to the open market and he's already got a valuer in. The house has gone up 30 grand since it went into this scheme, and the landlord will say he's given all the information. The local authority will say that they have all the information, but they haven't been able to sign off on the scheme. So there's problems there with the scheme, but it's a lifeline for ordinary families. And what we're asking, Minister, is that you throw out that lifeline, you give certainty to the market and resolve this issue that's outstanding.
Margaret, takim Michel leis an scéim seo scéim tíocht a hóisiilta de tionanta an láthair mar go scéim é a bhí agus mas an go córáid leanúnt atá ag dail le siúd tá an liste tíocht hóisiilta hana féin agus atá faoi bhagart go mbeadh siad gan déan amach an seo. Ní leanach pí amháin don le céimne ar gá chun daile leis an géir chéim tíochta agus ligann siad a clanna seasamhachta bheith có ina saoil seachas bat agus bóthir bheith tugadóibh. A lándáibh siúd atá ag glórag takeíocht don lehéad is céim bíonn siad insna tithe ar fa tréimh sé cuiseach fada agus bíonn siad ceangata leis an cantar an bhfuil siad i géirí fannacht. Others have spoken about the need to address this in terms of making sure that there's less homelessness, but there's also a need for quicker decision. And there's a need in particular, and I listened to the Minister and what
what he was speaking about, the lack of refurbishment funding in this. That's absolutely ridiculous given the situation a lot of these families find them in. A lot of these homes were not visited by local authorities because over the years the HAP or the ROS wasn't adequately addressed, yet you're expecting them to stay in those accommodations. I have one case of a 29-year-old with 2 autistic children who's paid privately for therapy because once again the state had failed her. But 7 years into a HAP payment, no assessment was ever done on her property. Yes, that's bad, but it's even going to be worse if you put those 2 children into homeless accommodation for God knows how long, given the state of the homeless list in this city. So this is one of the schemes that can work. This is a landlord who's willing to engage, but he has been forced to look at the private market because the delays in you making the announcement on this scheme and the delays in local authorities addressing the problems, and also the fact that local authorities said they won't move because there's adaptations like attic conversions, and yet you're talking about allowing sheds and back gardens, and you're not allowing people to live in the home that they've been in for 7 years.
Minister, I wish you both of you well in your new roles. I would like to thank my colleagues in Sinn Féin for bringing this relevant and important Tenant-in-Situ (PNB) to the floor of the House this evening. The Tenant-in-Situ scheme is a vital tool in the prevention of homelessness and has been a saviour to many families across the country. Since April 2023, the Tenant-in-Situ scheme alone has saved over 2,500 households from the sickening prospect of losing a roof over their heads, or being at the mercy of a system that is overwhelmed and broken due to dealing with the sheer volumes of evictions and notices of termination. In my own county of Wexford, 52 households have been benefited from this scheme since 2023, 13 in the Wexford district, 14 in the Scorty district, 12 in the Gorey district, 12 in the Ross district and 1 in the Rosslare district. Without this scheme, those families and individuals would have ended up in hostels and in overcrowded emergency accommodation centres, or granny's box room flat or room, as if they're lucky. Minister, I would like to ask that the new proposed criteria by the Department of Housing be fully re-evaluated and returned to the current rules. Under new proposals, a couple without children will be excluded. Single citizens will be excluded. A property must be at least 2 years in the social housing support scheme, and the Housing Department also is removing the ability of councils to exceed the set targets. Plus, the councils will not be able to reclaim refurbishment costs. Surely these measures, to put it mildly, are downright unfair, discriminatory and restrictive in nature, disavowing a large cohort of single people and couples from a scheme that could prevent them from becoming homeless. Figures show that the highest cohort of people seeking social housing in fact is single people. To reduce any funding to local authorities and introduce restrictive access measures to the Tenant-in-Situ scheme in a time of housing emergency is bad policy and will result in more people becoming homeless. The Department must roll back and remove their new discriminatory restrictive proposals and increase the necessary staff to process applications in an efficient and timely manner. Again, Minister, we see rents averaging €1,423 in my own county and an increase in rents of 5.7% nationally, year on year in. So, Minister, I'd just like to ask deputies to note the fault lines in the Department, new proposals and support this Sinn Féin bill. Thank you.
The most recent homeless figures issued in January show a significant rise in the number of people and families who are homeless. Homeless figures have reached record levels and stand at an overall total of 15,286, of which 4,603 are children. Over the last number of years, a large number of landlords have been leaving the rental sector. Estimates show that between 2021 and 2023, roughly 40% of landlords have left the market. The Tenant-in-Situ scheme has operated successfully for 2,500 households since April 23, which represents thousands of men, women and children who would otherwise have been made homeless. This is a plus for both the families who would otherwise be homeless and also for the landlords. However, a large degree of uncertainty has been created and is causing unnecessary delays because of the lack of clarity on funding and the new rules being introduced, which will be more restrictive and make it more difficult for people to avail of the scheme. As a consequence, we have a large number of families living in fear of being evicted and of being made homeless, and many are forced to overstay in the rental property because the local authorities have not received the approvals to go ahead with the scheme. In my constituency of Dublin North West, I have at present a number of such cases agreed and being held up because Dublin City Council is waiting for the go-ahead from your department. In this housing and homeless crisis, this is just not acceptable. Families are under severe strain and stress, not knowing where they stand and with the threat of homelessness hanging over their heads. Minister, you need to act immediately to get this scheme up and running. Your department needs to actively engage with local authorities and implement this scheme as a matter of urgency. Thank you.
Minister, despite government assertions that you are tackling the housing crisis and adequately fighting to end homelessness, the reality on the ground tells a far different story. In 1 week in January 2024, there were 172 adults accessing emergency accommodation in Louth. The same week in 2025, that had jumped to 232 adults. That is a stark 35% increase in those needing emergency accommodation in the space of just a year. By any definition or metric, that paints a picture of abject failure to tackle homelessness in Louth by this government. As a former county councillor and chair of Louth County Council's Housing Strategic Policy Committee, I know the impact and real-life positives the Tenant-in-Situ scheme had for those lucky enough to be approved. And still, the requests by tenants who have been served notice to quit by their landlords who want to sell their properties are coming in thick and fast, daily and weekly. But for some reason, this scheme that has actually delivered and allowed people to stay in their homes has been suspended since the end of last year due to the failure of government to agree the funding and targets for 2025, with hundreds of applications left pending without a decision due to uncertainty and lack of funding. That delay has put people out of the homes that in some cases they rented for years or even decades, and in turn causing homelessness. This decision by government will cost the taxpayer more in the long run, as those that will have to leave their homes will most likely end up in emergency accommodation. You must provide local authorities with their capital allocations and targets for 2025 as a matter of urgency. Allow them to process all outstanding applications and reopen the Tenant-in-Situ scheme without restrictions to new applications. This is your first big policy decision, Minister, and I'd urge you not to oppose this motion or back the government amendment, as the proof in what government policy delivers is clear. That's a 35% increase in those needing emergency accommodation in my constituency in just 1 year. No one can stand over that.
Dr. Crone.
The Tenant-in-Situ scheme has saved many a family across North Kildare from homelessness due to the housing crisis created by this government and the almost identical government before it. Abandoning this scheme is going to leave people in a housing limbo, suddenly facing homelessness. The Tenant-in-Situ scheme has offered a lifeline to those facing emergency accommodation, sofa surfing, sleeping in their cars, or worse, sleeping rough. It is a vital homelessness prevention scheme. Yet it has been up to Sinn Féin and others to pressurise this government time and time again into keeping the scheme and making sure it works. Indeed, it was the opposition that pressured you into setting it up in the first place. County Kildare is currently 6th in the state across Dublin, outside of Dublin, for adults accessing emergency accommodation, with an 11% increase from last year. It will be more than an 11% increase next year if we get rid of this scheme. It's hard to believe that this government is serious about housing when we see homelessness figures continuously rise, the untruths told about housing targets during the last general election, and our own Taoiseach laughing it up about the housing crisis in Ireland with the property tycoon in the Oval Office in the White House. But we shouldn't be surprised. This is the company that Fianna Fáil keep. It is the party of the Galway tent and developers and speculators. While your buddies are all profiting off a crisis that you have created, an entire generation is starting to emigrate. I've seen it now in my friends, in my daughter's friends. They're starting to emigrate, and those who can't afford it are being locked out of housing. It's an Irish shiv.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, the concern, and it is a genuine concern that has motivated us bringing forward this private member's motion, is that the capital funding that has been announced by your department to date and the new restrictive eligibility criteria will result in fewer tenant-in-situ purchases this year than last year, even if the demand is the same. That's the central concern here. The total capital allocation of 325 million, as you said, is across 4 acquisition streams. That funding at current average acquisition prices will deliver fewer homes this year than last year or the year before. That's simply a fact. The restrictive criteria you're introducing make no sense. Reasonable refurbishment costs are a vital element for this scheme to work, and without it, many properties will go unbought. Prioritising one group of vulnerable homeless people inevitably means deprioritising and ultimately excluding another group of very vulnerable homeless people. They are both equally as deserving of prioritisation. Currently, they receive that, and that should not change. The 2-year rule makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, and there seems to be a suggestion that somehow somebody somewhere is gaming the system. I'm not saying you're saying that, but some of the people advising you, I think, may believe that, despite the fact that there's no evidence. And the very, very rigid adherence on a notice to quit, rather than the slightly more flexible approach that has been in evidence over the last period, really, I have to say, is regrettable. You say the scheme is not suspended. Minister, on the ground, that is not the truth. If I ring a local authority today, as a landlord, I will be told no new applications have been taken until the Minister has made his decision and the circular is issued. There are hundreds of applications that were made last year that are awaiting a final decision that cannot be processed. Now, I don't know what definition of the word suspended you operate on, but for me that is a suspension. All I'm asking you to do is, if you're not willing to listen to us, go and talk to the people on the front line. Go and talk to the people preventing homelessness in the statutory and voluntary sector and ask them, do they think this will make the scheme better or worse? They will tell you it will make it worse. I'm urging you to reconsider. Please, between now and when you sign off on the circular, do not make these changes. Do not make more people homeless who otherwise would not be so. Do the right thing and scrap these proposed changes. Thank you, Chair.